Sobering statistics tonight. New data from Harris County Health shows cases of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections are on the rise in our area and rising faster than anywhere else in Texas.
We're not in a fair fight. We're already outmatched and outgunned at all points.
I believe that it is quite highly possible that the AIDS virus is a result of genetic warfare testing.
It came from a private sector laboratory for money, because when they find the pill that you can take to let you do it again, somebody's going to make some money.
What if one of the biggest health stories in America wasn't just about rising numbers, but about questions nobody wants to ask? What if the shocking increase in HIV and STD cases in Houston is connected to something far bigger than most people realize? And why is Katt Williams suddenly at the center of a conversation that has people arguing across social media, radio shows, and comment sections all over the country? For years, Katt Williams has built a reputation for saying things that many people dismiss at first, only for those same topics to come back into the spotlight later. Now, he's raising eyebrows once again after comments connected to Houston's growing STD crisis started gaining attention online.
If you went on spring break in Houston, Texas, you might want to get tested. 28,000 people currently have HIV in Houston, Texas. 40,000 people currently tested positive for STDs in total.
But this story doesn't stop with statistics. It quickly opens the door to decades of controversy, resurfaced interviews, forgotten scandals, and historical events that still spark debate today. As more people dig into the numbers, others are asking uncomfortable questions about influence, culture, power, and who really benefits when communities struggle. Then things take an even stranger turn when old statements from Will Smith begin resurfacing.
You know what I'm getting at? I read that you felt that the government was deliberately spraying cold germs in subways, was deliberately trying to make people ill with the AIDS virus. This is pretty serious stuff. Do you really feel that?
I believe that it is quite highly possible that the AIDS virus is a result of genetic warfare testing.
By American agents?
Absolutely.
Well, why?
Am I a conspiracy theorist? I'm a conspiracy theorist, all right.
Bringing an entirely different layer of controversy into the conversation. By the time we reach the end of this story, you'll see why so many people are divided over what's really happening, and why Katt Williams believes there's much more to the story than anyone is being told. The conversation started with a statistic that caught a lot of people off guard. Most Americans are used to hearing about health reports, disease outbreaks, and government studies. Usually, those stories make the news for a few days before disappearing from public attention. But this situation felt different from the beginning. Reports began circulating showing that Houston was experiencing some of the highest HIV and STD rates in Texas. Then more data started emerging, and the numbers became difficult to ignore. Health officials pointed out that certain communities were being affected at disproportionately high rates. Local organizations began sounding alarms. Community leaders started asking questions. And before long, social media grabbed hold of the story and turned it into a national conversation. At first, most people viewed it as another public health issue. Something unfortunate, but explainable. The standard explanations quickly appeared. Lack of healthcare access, poor education, economic struggles, risky behavior, limited prevention resources. For many people, that was the end of the discussion. For Katt Williams, it was just the beginning. Over the years, Katt has built a reputation unlike almost anyone else in entertainment. Whether people agree with him or not, there's one thing almost everyone admits. He rarely says what everyone else is saying. While many celebrities stay safely inside approved talking points, Katt has consistently challenged narratives that most public figures avoid completely. That's exactly why his comments immediately gained attention. Because instead of treating the numbers as an isolated health issue, Katt suggested people should look deeper, much deeper. And once those comments started spreading online, the debate exploded. Some viewers accused him of promoting conspiracy theories. Others argued that he was asking legitimate questions. Meanwhile, thousands of people began digging into statistics, historical events, and old interviews that many had forgotten even existed. The deeper people looked, the stranger the conversation became. Houston itself wasn't exactly a random location in this discussion. The city has long been one of America's largest metropolitan areas, attracting millions of visitors every year. Its nightlife, entertainment districts, festivals, sporting events, and spring break traffic make it a major cultural hub. That's why some online commentators were stunned when reports connected the city to concerning STD and HIV trends. The numbers sparked immediate concern, but the reactions became even more intense when people began discussing who was being affected the most. Studies indicated that Black communities were experiencing some of the highest infection rates. Those findings immediately transformed the conversation from a health issue into something much larger. Now, people weren't just talking about disease. They were talking about inequality. They were talking about access. They were talking about history. And eventually, they were talking about power. That's where Katt Williams entered the conversation in a way that only Katt Williams could. Instead of focusing exclusively on personal responsibility or individual choices, he pushed listeners toward a completely different question. What if people were looking at the outcome without examining the environment that produced it? That question immediately resonated with many supporters. According to this perspective, conversations about rising infection rates often focus on individuals while ignoring larger systems that influence behavior in the first place. Whether someone agreed or disagreed, the argument was powerful enough to spread rapidly. Soon, clips discussing Katt's comments were appearing everywhere. Reaction channels, podcasts, hip-hop blogs, political commentators. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. The reason was simple. The discussion wasn't really about Houston anymore. It was becoming a debate about culture itself. And that brought another controversial topic into the spotlight: the music industry. For years, Katt Williams has openly criticized powerful forces inside entertainment. He has repeatedly claimed that audiences are often encouraged to consume content that ultimately harms the communities being targeted. Supporters of his viewpoint argue that certain lifestyles receive disproportionate promotion through music, television, and social media. Critics dismiss that idea entirely. But either way, the argument has remained part of Katt's public message for years. Now, some people began connecting that argument to the Houston discussion. They asked a simple question: if culture influences behavior, then who controls culture? The moment that question entered the conversation, things became much more complicated, because suddenly people weren't debating healthcare anymore. They were debating corporations, record labels, media companies, advertising systems, algorithms, influencers, and the enormous industries that shape public attention every single day. Katt's supporters argued that when certain behaviors are glorified repeatedly across entertainment, those messages eventually influence real-world outcomes. Again, critics pushed back immediately. They argued that individuals make their own decisions and should be held accountable for them. The debate became intense. But regardless of which side people supported, one thing was becoming obvious. The conversation was growing far beyond Houston. And then another layer emerged. As old interviews resurfaced online, viewers began discovering statements made years ago by celebrities who had previously discussed controversial theories surrounding public health, government trust, and historical mistreatment of Black communities. Many younger viewers had never heard these interviews before. Others remembered them instantly. Suddenly, clips from decades ago were receiving millions of new views. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic, because once those interviews resurfaced, people began revisiting historical events that continue to generate debate even today. Stories that many Americans learned about in school. Stories that others had never heard before. Stories involving government programs, medical experiments, and public trust. For some observers, These historical examples proved that skepticism can sometimes be justified. For others, they had nothing to do with modern circumstances, but the effect was undeniable. The Houston discussion was no longer just about current events. It had become a conversation about history itself. And that's when things took an even more unexpected turn. Because while social media users were arguing over Katt Williams' comments, another famous name suddenly entered the spotlight. A resurfaced interview involving Will Smith began spreading online at an incredible pace. The clip was old, very old, but the statements inside it sounded shocking enough to feel brand new. Within days, countless creators were analyzing every word. Some viewers couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others claimed the interview had been ignored for years. And as more people watched it, the discussion surrounding Houston grew even more intense. Because now two major celebrities were being linked to questions that many people considered deeply controversial. Questions involving institutions. Questions involving trust. Questions involving things that most people rarely discuss publicly. Suddenly, what started as a local health story was evolving into one of the most polarizing conversations on the internet. And according to many viewers following the story, the most explosive revelations hadn't even surfaced yet. Because the historical examples people were about to revisit would completely change the direction of the debate and force everyone to confront questions that remain uncomfortable even today. As the debate surrounding Houston continued to spread online, the focus slowly shifted away from statistics and towards something much more emotional: trust. For many people, the numbers alone were alarming. But for others, the real issue wasn't the data itself. It was whether the public could trust the institutions responsible for explaining those numbers. That's where the conversation became far more complicated. Because once people start questioning trust, they inevitably start looking backward. And that's exactly what happened. Suddenly, social media users weren't just discussing current infection rates anymore. They were digging through decades of history, searching for examples that either supported or challenged the claims being made. Some people argued that history proved institutions deserve skepticism. Others insisted that historical mistakes shouldn't be used to explain modern problems. The internet split into two completely different camps. And right in the middle of that argument sat Katt Williams. The comedian's comments had already generated headlines, but now they were being connected to a much larger narrative. Supporters claimed he was highlighting patterns that many people preferred not to discuss. Critics argued that he was encouraging speculation instead of focusing on practical solutions. But regardless of where people stood, one thing was impossible to deny. The discussion wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. Then came the resurfaced Will Smith interview. Almost overnight, clips began appearing across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X. Millions of viewers who had never seen the footage before suddenly found themselves watching comments that had been recorded decades earlier. The reaction was immediate. Some viewers were shocked. Others were fascinated. Many couldn't believe the interview had remained largely forgotten for so long. As creators broke down every statement, a new wave of curiosity emerged. People started asking why certain conversations seemed to disappear for years before suddenly returning to public attention. Why do some interviews become famous instantly, while others remain buried until the timing changes? Why do certain topics keep resurfacing generation after generation? Nobody seemed to agree on the answers, but everyone was talking. The renewed attention surrounding Will Smith's old comments only fueled the broader debate that Katt Williams had helped ignite. And once that happened, another chapter of history entered the spotlight: the Tuskegee study. For many Americans, the name immediately triggered recognition. For others, it was the first time they had ever heard about it. Either way, the story carried enormous emotional weight. The details were disturbing enough to leave a lasting mark on public consciousness. For decades, the Tuskegee study has been cited as one of the most infamous examples of unethical medical treatment in American history. Because of that legacy, it continues to influence conversations about trust, healthcare, and government accountability even today. As online discussions intensified, countless creators began referencing Tuskegee while analyzing modern concerns. Supporters of Katt's perspective pointed to historical events like Tuskegee as evidence that questioning powerful institutions isn't irrational. Critics responded that historical abuses should not automatically be used as proof of modern wrongdoing. Back and forth the arguments went, hour after hour, day after day. The story continued growing. What made the situation especially explosive was that people weren't simply arguing about facts. They were arguing about interpretation. Two individuals could look at the exact same historical event and arrive at completely different conclusions. One person might see a warning. Another might see a lesson from the past that has already been addressed. And because neither side was willing to back down, the discussion became increasingly emotional. But then another layer entered the conversation, one that pushed the debate beyond American borders entirely. As researchers, content creators, and commentators continued exploring historical examples, attention shifted toward events that had taken place in other parts of the world. Stories involving South Africa began circulating. Old interviews resurfaced. Former officials made headlines again. Documentaries were shared thousands of times. Suddenly, people found themselves discussing allegations connected to another era and another continent. The significance wasn't necessarily about proving anything happening today. It was about demonstrating how deeply distrust can become rooted when communities believe they have experienced injustice. For supporters of Katt Williams' arguments, these historical examples reinforced their concerns. For critics, they represented unrelated events being pulled into a completely different conversation. The divide continued growing wider. Meanwhile, another question began emerging. If distrust plays such a major role in public health discussions, what impact does culture have? That question brought the spotlight back to the entertainment industry. And once again, Katt Williams was already waiting there. For years, Katt has argued that entertainment does more than entertain. He believes it influences behavior, expectations, values, and perceptions. Whether people agree with him or not, his position has remained remarkably consistent. Long before the Houston conversation began, he was criticizing systems he believed rewarded harmful messages while ignoring more positive alternatives. As clips of those older interviews circulated, many viewers noticed a pattern. The same themes kept appearing: power, influence, control, culture, responsibility. The discussions became increasingly focused on who shapes public behavior and how those influences affect communities over time. Supporters argued that entertainment industries possess enormous power. Critics argued that audiences have free choice. Again, neither side seemed capable of convincing the other. But something interesting was happening. The more people debated Katt Williams' claims, the more attention those claims received. Every reaction video generated new reaction videos. Every podcast discussion created more podcast discussions. Every criticism produced additional support. The controversy became self-sustaining, and that only increased curiosity, because now people weren't simply examining Katt Williams. They were examining the entire environment surrounding the story. They were looking at music, television, social media, celebrity culture, corporate influence, political narratives, historical events, healthcare systems. All of it seemed connected in one massive conversation. Then something unexpected happened. People started noticing similarities between discussions taking place today and discussions that had occurred years earlier. The names changed, the topics changed, but the underlying questions often remained remarkably similar. Who benefits? Who controls the narrative? Who decides what receives attention? Who gets ignored? Those questions appeared again and again. Some viewers found the similarities unsettling. Others dismissed them as coincidence. Yet the debate refused to disappear. If anything, it became stronger. And that's exactly why the story remains so compelling. Because underneath the headlines, underneath the statistics, underneath the celebrity commentary, there was a much deeper issue driving the entire discussion. Trust. Trust in institutions. Trust in media. Trust in experts. Trust in history. Trust in the information people consume every day. By this point, the Houston story had evolved into something far bigger than anyone expected. What began as a conversation about rising infection rates had transformed into a nationwide debate touching nearly every major institution in American life. And the deeper people dug, the more questions they uncovered. But according to those closely following the controversy, the most explosive part of the story was still ahead. Because the final stage of the debate wasn't about Houston. It wasn't about statistics. It wasn't even about Katt Williams. It was about whether history was repeating itself in ways most people failed to recognize, and why so many Americans were suddenly questioning explanations they once accepted without hesitation. And that's where the biggest revelations were waiting. By the time the Houston controversy reached its peak, the conversation had become almost impossible to contain. What started as a discussion about rising HIV and STD rates had transformed into something much larger than anyone anticipated. Every new statistic sparked another debate. Every resurfaced interview created another wave of reactions. Every opinion generated thousands of responses. And through it all, one question refused to disappear. Was this simply the result of personal choices and social circumstances, or was there something deeper influencing the outcomes people were seeing? That question sat at the center of everything. For supporters of Katt Williams, the answer wasn't found in a single event or a single headline. They argued that the real story involved decades of cultural influence, economic conditions, historical distrust, and systems that shape opportunities long before individuals ever make decisions for themselves. From their perspective, focusing only on the final outcome missed the bigger picture entirely. They believed people were looking at symptoms instead of causes. But critics pushed back just as hard. They argued that removing personal responsibility from the conversation created a dangerous precedent. According to them, no matter what historical examples existed, individuals still controlled their own actions and decisions. The divide couldn't have been clearer. Both sides believed they were defending the truth, and neither side appeared willing to compromise. Meanwhile, the internet continued doing what it does best, digging deeper, analyzing everything, questioning everything. As millions of people consumed clips, interviews, articles, and commentary, another realization began emerging. The Houston story had become a reflection of a much larger problem in modern America. People no longer trust information the same way they once did. One source said one thing. Another source said something completely different. Experts disagreed with other experts. Influencers challenged official narratives. Official narratives challenged influencers. The average person was left trying to determine who deserved their trust. That uncertainty created the perfect environment for debates like this one to explode. Because once trust begins eroding, every question feels bigger. Every statistic feels suspicious. Every explanation feels incomplete. And every alternative theory gains attention. Katt Williams understood that dynamic better than most. For years, he had built his public image around challenging accepted narratives. Whether discussing entertainment, politics, media, or culture, he consistently positioned himself as someone willing to ask uncomfortable questions. That's exactly why his comments carried so much weight. Even people who disagreed with him often listened carefully, because Katt had developed a reputation for saying things others wouldn't. And in an era where many public figures avoid controversy, that made him stand out. As the discussion evolved, attention returned once again to the entertainment industry. Many supporters of Katt's perspective argued that culture plays an enormous role in shaping behavior. Not because entertainment forces anyone to do anything, but because repeated messages influence perceptions over time. They pointed to trends that had dominated music, television, social media, and celebrity culture for years. They questioned which lifestyles received promotion and which messages received less visibility. They asked who benefited financially from those trends. Those questions didn't necessarily produce clear answers, but they generated endless discussion, and discussion generated attention. Soon, people who had never cared about Houston statistics found themselves watching videos about media influence, corporate power, and cultural messaging. The conversation kept expanding. Then came the emotional turning point. The moment many viewers began connecting the current debate to broader concerns affecting communities across the country. Because at its core, the argument wasn't really about one city. It wasn't even about one health issue. It was about whether certain communities face challenges that are often discussed only after the damage has already been done. Supporters of Katt's viewpoint believed that's exactly what was happening. They argued that society often focuses on consequences while ignoring the conditions that produce those consequences. Critics remained unconvinced. Yet even many critics acknowledged that some of the questions being raised deserved serious discussion. That's what made the situation so unusual. People disagreed on the conclusions, but many agreed the conversation itself was important. As weeks passed, the controversy continued generating headlines. Podcasters discussed it, radio hosts debated it, comment sections exploded with arguments. Some viewers viewed Katt Williams as a truth teller exposing uncomfortable realities. Others viewed him as someone encouraging speculation without evidence. The gap between those perspectives remained enormous. But regardless of which side people chose, what do you think about everything we covered in today's video? Was Katt Williams raising questions that deserve more attention? Or do you think the entire controversy has been blown way out of proportion? This is one of those stories where people seem completely divided, and honestly, that's what makes the conversation so interesting. Drop your thoughts down in the comments, because we want to hear your perspective. Do you believe the Houston situation is being explained correctly? Or do you think there are bigger factors that people aren't talking about? Respectfully share your opinion and join the discussion with the rest of the community. If you enjoyed this video and want more celebrity news, hip-hop drama, industry controversies, viral stories, and trending entertainment updates, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you the latest stories everyone is talking about. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you never miss a new upload. We have plenty more breaking stories, celebrity revelations, and unexpected developments coming your way very soon. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. And before you go, here's one final question. Do you think Katt Williams is exposing uncomfortable truths? Or is this simply another controversy fueled by speculation? Let us know below.